and we're reversing them like this. Then we're taking your two outside fingers, 1 and 4, and reversing them. And then taking the two inside fingers and putting them back to their starting position. The next step is to just move up the chord shape to the next string group, so between the A and the B string, and repeat the same motion, and then move up to the last string group between the low E and the G string, and repeat the same 4 chords again. Okay, what I just played is the continuation of the first warm-up exercise. Basically, when you're through, you're going to have a sequence of stretches that continue down the neck. So this is considered part 2. And what I did is I started in our original position, which was between the low E and the G, and we were in the 10th position, and I stretched the first finger down a half step and kept the rest where they were, and did the same sequence of finger moves. So in other words, then reversing the 2 middle fingers, then the 2 outer, and then the 2 middle again, and just continued up to the next string group, and then to the final string group again. Alright, that was part 3 of the exercise, and at the end of part 2 we ended up with this position between the first string groups. Now what you're going to do is put your fingers back in order, and while leaving your 3rd and 4th where they are, stretch your 2nd down a half step. So we have this shape, and once again continue with the moves all the way up the string groups. Now for the final part. Okay, that was the final part, and if you haven't guessed already, what we did is we moved our 3rd finger down a half step while keeping the pinky where it was. So we had this shape. This time the stretch is between your 3rd and 4th finger, and continue with the pattern until we got up to the first set of strings again. And then all you do is you bring your pinky down a half step, which brings you to the exact same shape that you started with, but you're a half step lower, because we started originally in the 10th position, now we're in the 9th position. And that's the first warm-up exercise. Okay, the second warm-up exercise for your left hand is basically a variation of the one that we just finished. You can start in the 10th position again with the same setup, and we're going to do the same moves. Except this time we're going to do some different stretches with the left hand. And by the way, you don't have to arpeggiate the notes, you can just strum the chords if you'd like. Okay, this stretch was different in that instead of moving one finger down a half step, we move the first finger down a half step and the 4th finger up a half step. So we have a double stretch between the 3rd and the 4th and the 1st and the 2nd. And then we did the same exact moves. Okay, now we'll do the final variation on this exercise, and this involves yet a larger stretch. Here's how it goes. Alright, what we did here on the final variation is instead of just having a stretch between the first and second and the third and fourth, we have a half-step stretch now between every finger. So you do that by moving your first finger down yet another half step, and then your second finger down a half step as well. Remember when doing these exercises to make sure that the notes ring clearly and see just how far down the neck you can go by moving downward by half steps. Now, for all you crazy guitarists out there, there is one more variation that involves some super stretches. Remember, don't hurt yourself. As you can see, I started out in a lower position, which made the final stretch a lot more difficult. Let me break it down for you now. With this exercise, instead of having all your fingers on adjacent strings, we start with the two middle fingers, 2 and 3, on the two middle strings, D and G, and your first and fourth fingers on the low and high E strings. And then you just continue with the same moves that we've been doing throughout. The moves from here should look familiar. We move the first finger down a half step, and the fourth finger up a half step, and then the first finger down one more half step, and the second finger down another half step, creating a full step between each finger for the ultimate stretch. What I usually do is I play these exercises in sequence, one after the next without stopping. I start on the 12th or 10th fret and work my way down chromatically until I can't stretch anymore. Now let's turn our attention to right hand exercises, and you can give your left hand a rest. The next exercise concentrates on the flow and precision of the right hand and has many variations. So let me demonstrate it in its basic form. As you just heard, that exercise involved notes that were being arpeggiated intervallically. So let's talk about the left hand shapes that I was going through. It's based off of a major bar chord form with an added third, except you're playing the notes separately. And then we just sort of intervallically disperse those notes. Now that bar chord is moved up through a progression that doesn't make too much sense, but